Swipe left, swipe right, grab a blanket, turn off your lights. It's almost Valentine's Day. Have you got a date this year? Don't be too picky, but just don't pick anybody, because it may turn out like one of these horror stories. Tinder dude I knew for less than a week. Thanks for Soulmates. Okay, so my friend, let's call her Celine, moved to a place for the summer where she only knows one person, her childhood friend. So she made a Tinder in search of some more people to hang out with. It was complete with a biography, clarifying for no hookups and just friends. This guy, let's call him Joe, who was also looking for just friends, and her matched. Thinking that this dude was fun to talk to and an all-around nice person, she kept talking to him for about a week before deciding to meet in person. One day, we all Skyped together, me, Joe, and Celine, and I started texting and Skyping him too. Just to be safe, Celine brought her friend Simon when they met up in a mall. At first, everything seemed fine. They talked about their similar interests, like video games, as they sat on a bench charging their phones. Soon enough, however, Celine and Simon realized this guy acted like an immature middle school boy in a grown man's body, laughing at sexual jokes that were not funny at all, and using phrases like psychopath, retarded, and kill yourself in a casual manner. To sum it up, Joe would not shut up about how talented he was and kept gossiping about other people that walked by, saying things like, "Wow, she's gross." Meanwhile, according to Celine, this guy smelled like he hadn't taken a shower in weeks. Anyways, Joe proceeded to talk about me nonstop, saying things like, "We're soulmates," and kept showing Celine pictures of me from Snapchat. He kept talking about me for about 20 minutes, according to Celine and Simon, and made them uncomfortable. Joe told Celine he was so glad that they were best friends, and that he was becoming so much closer friends to her friends. Throughout their few but painful hours of hanging out with him, he continued his inappropriate behavior, like shoving Celine out of the way to look at something, pointing at things that looked like dildos even though they didn't even remotely look like one, and of course, talking about me. He said that he looked forward to meeting me in person and planned on getting a plane to see me even though I had never invited him or mentioned that idea at all. As soon as Celine and Simon awkwardly said goodbye and got into Simon's car, Celine texted me about her uncomfortable experience and warned me not to talk to him anymore. I called her so she and Simon could vent about it. Celine and I realized that we both missed some red flags. Joe told Celine repeatedly that it was a good thing that they meet in person so that she wouldn't think he's a pedophile or a rapist. He also got sad one day and texted Celine that he thought she was pushing him away just because she couldn't Skype him a few times because she was busy doing something else. A huge red flag that I ignored was that he kept calling me his soulmate, because I thought he was just joking. Apparently he was really taking it seriously. Let me just repeat that he had only been talking to me for a few days and Celine less than a week. So, creepy clingy dude named Joe, I hope to never meet you in person. And if you see this, just know to never try and talk to me again. I am not your soulmate, and Celine is not your best friend. Now leave us alone. Alright? Peace. Tinder meetup gone wrong. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed fun and cool, and after about a week of talking, she suggested we meet up in person. She invited me to this coffee shop, and I accepted. However, the day of, she started messaging me saying she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to still meet up with him. Naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile, and continued on with life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun, and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. Weeks later, I would realize that this new girl was the same girl as the week before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure, as long as it was a public place. We decided on a cafe, and the next day I sat at the table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed, and she was nowhere to be found. I then peered out the window and saw, from across the street, a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited for a few seconds, and looked back. He was still there staring at me. At that point, I left the cafe, got on my bike, and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to pull myself together, and reasoned that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile, and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out. After about a day, I stopped picking up any calls unless it displayed the caller's name. I then started receiving texts. At first, they were pretty harmless, calls for attention, and begging me to meet in person. I then changed to very sexual texts, until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing out names of family and friends' names and whereabouts, saying he or she would get them involved unless I answered. Because they were texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called phone providers, they told me the number could not be traced. Great. I waited for 2 weeks, not responding to the texts. But eventually, it became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 to 20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The texting and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out numbers at a user's request, and they said their policy stated that they would not and could not do it. One day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was denied. Within a day, friends started contacting me, asking me what the hell I was doing, saying they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation, and they helped me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what was going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but told me since I, or any of my relatives or friends, were in no immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker. I decided against it, however, and just hope it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated and ignored all text and phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional text as well, which weirded us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it. One day, I came home and things felt very eerie. Door unlocked, windows open, and no one home. A strong breeze running through the apartment. I did a check of the place and found nothing weird, so I locked everything up and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I'll get an occasional text, but at most one every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. it definitely affected my social and personal life. I became much more wary of the people around me and my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps or websites. Things are getting back to normal at this point. And right now, I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should ever use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone, FaceTime them first, Skype, anything. I was naive about it and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Suicide as collateral, and a warning to gay men in LA. I met Trent on Tinder. On October of 2014, he seemed like my type. Tall, slender, the very definition of a twink. It's hard to find many feminine gay guys in the boonies of Oklahoma, so I swiped right. He started talking and set up a date. Everything was amazing for the first couple of months, until the end of the semester, when my roommates moved away. That was when he came to spend some time with me during winter break. When I started wanting to spend more time with my family for Christmas, Trent decided to let me know that he couldn't go home because he had cut ties with his family. This was a huge red flag if I'd ever seen one, but I decided to try help him find a place to stay and then break up with him. I didn't want to make him homeless. By the time the break ended, Trent had enrolled at my university and was now living across the hall from me. I knew that it would be awkward when I left him, but I wasn't prepared in the slightest for what was about to come. When the new semester began, he knocked on my door, complaining that he couldn't sleep in his own room for several reasons, the most frightening of which was that he was afraid that his roommates would kill him. I reassured him that they were just unreasonable thoughts and sent him back to his room. Not an hour later, Trent comes back to me threatening suicide. I take him to the hospital, with him sobbing about how I was going to break up with him the entire time. I never told him I was going to. The next morning, I got 30 phone calls. I changed my number and blocked him on all social apps I used. Then he created a new Tinder account and finally coaxed me into meeting him for a conversation. I ended up taking him back because even though he was medicated, he was still unstable. He had attempted suicide after he was released from the hospital. I had moved off campus at that point. Fast forward about 3 months, and now he has moved off campus into an apartment he can't afford. I had been trying to get him the hell out of my house because he was essentially living with me, since he couldn't stay at his new place on campus without attempting suicide. At that point, I was in a marriage-like relationship with Trent, against my will, because I was afraid to be the cause of someone's suicide. One night, I decided I didn't care about Trent anymore, and broke up with him. This is where it gets dark. For an hour we went around and around, with me begging through my tears for him not to kill himself, and he essentially trying to force me out of his house so he could commit suicide. It came to him threatening to call the police, to tell them that I was psychotic, and threatening him in his own home. I left and called the police. And when they arrived, they found him attempting to blow up his entire apartment complex. When he got back, the true stalking began. I started receiving up to 50 calls in one day, from numbers that would change. He was changing his number to bypass my call block. He attempts to get me to talk to him, just like before. He created several profiles under several names on several social apps to contact me, leaving just enough information for me to deduce that it was him. His insistence that he wasn't going to hurt me crossed the threshold from creepy into almost threatening. Like a come out, wherever you are kind of feeling. The entire time, he was trying to get me alone in a room with him. I abandoned my home and moved in with my aunt 20 miles away. One night, at 10:30 p.m., I received a call from the police department notifying me that my apartment had been broken into and that I was needed to check the apartment for missing possessions. He posed as me to get a locksmith to open my door. My drive back to my apartment was through one of the worst lightning storms I've ever seen. When I got there, I had a friend with me and a baseball bat. I opened the door and noticed that things weren't missing. New things were there, actually, things I didn't own. I opened my bedroom door to find Trent's phone on the charger. My bed had been stripped of its sheets. Turning to the window, I saw Trent's clothes in a pile, and that's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew he was right behind me. When I turned around, he was in my closet, hunched over and naked. He had a wild look in his eye, and yet exited the closet in the calmest manner imaginable. It was like he was a zombie, pale, with rings around his eyes, unkempt hair, and a blank expression. I waved my bat at him, but he seemed prepared to die. He asked me to kill him. He tried to wrestle the bat away from me. He tried to prove that he legally lived in my apartment. He tried telling me that he had given me HIV. I eventually got him into my living room and got him to get dressed before the cops arrived. He lunged at me, and the police tackled him. So unfolded the most violent arrest I had ever witnessed. No amount of tasing subdued him. He screamed, "Police brutality! I just want to talk to Brian. Why won't you let me talk to Brian? Give me 5 minutes alone with Brian!" The stalking continued after he posted bail. The next day, he knocked on my apartment door posing as the police. He found me in my class and chased me, eventually laying hands on me, running away when I pepper sprayed him, and tried to break into my house again. He was arrested again for trespassing. I got a protective order put out against him after he posted bail the second time. That did not deter him. He continued his calls. I finished the semester and moved back home, and began reporting every incident of him violating that order, which were numerous. He left for LA because he thinks that the order is only valid in the state in which it was issued. If he ever comes back, or if he's arrested in California, I'll be taking him to court. But still, Trent, let's not meet. Just a warning for any gay man in the Los Angeles area. If you meet a young gay man, slender, about 5 feet 11 inches tall, blue eyes and blonde, with tattoos on his lower stomach, side, upper back, and ankle, do not by any means invite him into your home. Show him where your home is, give him contact info, or provide assistance to him in any way. He may go by many names. If you meet anyone matching this description, PM me, and we can work it out if it's him or not. To all the other gay men, just be careful not to date a crazy. Update. I'm not sure if anyone is following this thread, but I just received email communication from Trent. It was a suicide note. He's still alive as of this moment, but he is planning to kill himself again. Of course, he blames me for his suicide, but I know I'm not the one to blame. I saved him from himself 3 times already, and he is far out of my range of help, so it's time to let him be his own person and make his own decisions. Stalking never ends until the stalker is dead.